Many people will call that drone is a wonder weapon, game changer, and so on. But personally, I don't really think so. It's that, there are no single weapons could really change a war.
One of the great fallacies is that with removing the pilot from the cockpit, that you somehow remove the importance of enablers, of engineers, of sustainers, of maintainers, of intelligence analysts. I mean, when you take a look at an MQ-9 Reaper drone, the most advanced large armed and network drone in the world, it takes something like 200 plus personnel to make that actually work, and it's a globally spanning enterprise.
We should actually also develop our own counter-drone capability. It's because that, we are facing China, and China is not only a big military power, but also a drone-grade power.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Jaime Ocon, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. Drones are going to reshape the future of warfare, at least if you believe the headlines. Reports and dramatic footage from Ukraine make the evening news, but how much of that reflects real changes in tactics and military strategy? And how much of that is just hype? In this episode, we'll be taking a look at unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, and the impact they have on future conflicts. For this discussion, we are joined by Paul Lushenko, an assistant professor at the U.S. Army War College from Pennsylvania. And from Taipei, we welcome Dr. Jyh-Shyang, Assistant Research Fellow at the government-backed Institute for National Defense and Security Research. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Paul, I want to start with you. Looking at drones, looking at all these videos and headlines coming out of Ukraine, is there anything that's surprising you?
Well, again, thanks for having both of us on the program. And I'd be remiss if I didn't state that my views are my own. They don't represent the U.S. government, the Department of the Army as well. So one of the most surprising wrinkles that I've observed from the conflict in Ukraine as it relates to drones is just the hype surrounding these capabilities. So there's great fanfare surrounding things, let's say, like a first-person view drone, of course, the TB2 Bayraktar, Turkish-manufactured drone that wreaked havoc on Russian forces that were attempting to invade Kiev. But when you step back and you take a look at the effectiveness of these capabilities, what you really see is they've been tactically effective, which is to say on the battlefield, much less so operationally, which is about stitching together different campaigns over time and space to achieve intermediate objectives that would have strategic implications. In this case, that looks like war termination. And from that optic, drones have not been effective strategically in the context of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia.
And Jyh-Shyang, what about Taiwan? What is Taiwan learning about the use of drones in the war in Ukraine?
I think, first of all, we are facing actually the threat from China, and they actually do have a lot of a great advantage about the quantity. So we have to try to enhance our quality to offset the Chinese threat. And in that sense, I think drones could of course help Taiwan to maximize our firepower and try to avoid any kind of loss of casualties in that sense. So I think currently in recent years we do have a focus of asymmetrical warfare, and in that sense, I think drone is of course a very good stuff for Taiwanese military to counter Chinese military. And what we are learning now is actually two things. Firstly, is that we should use drone, and secondly, we should actually also develop our own counter drone capability. It's because that we are facing China, and China is not only a big military power, but also a drone grade power. That means before we create our drone fleet, we are also facing a very strong Chinese drone fleet.
Well, we'll get to Taiwan's drone strategy, but Paul, I want to follow up on that question. Are drones a game changer in how militaries are now thinking about how to conduct a conflict or defend themselves? Is this a wonder weapon, as many people are calling it?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I think it's exacerbated by the emergence of so-called laws or lethally autonomous weapons systems that can, on their own, which is to say without human oversight, identify, track, and target different enemy capabilities and personnel. So I think what we have to do is understand that we can't reify or conflate military victory with one capability or the next. And we've seen over the course of history the emergence of capabilities, the Gatling gun, of course, before that, the crossbow, and other capabilities that have changed the character of war. And as somebody who teaches military professionals at the War College, about campaigning, about strategy making, what we really think about comparative advantage on the battlefield is the ability to integrate all combined arms across time and space to create vulnerabilities. In other words, there is no silver bullet in conflict, although these capabilities, as the professor was stating, do afford a high degree of force protection as well as precision on the battlefield. And really, if I could, back to what the professor said briefly, it used to be, let's say, up to even the first Persian Gulf War, we were attempting to build mass in comparison to an adversary. So our relative combat power would be greater. Now, in the last 10 or 15 years or so, we've seen the importance of heightened precision. I think going forward, what most defense analysts think was going to be a game changer, really, for conflict in the 21st century is so-called precision mass, where you can marshal a lot of capability very quickly and apply it at time and need in a very surgical manner.
Jyh-Shyang, I'd love to get your response on that because I understand that Taiwan's drone strategy is relatively new. This 国际无人机队, this national drone team, only came out about 2 years ago. Does Taiwan have a robust drone strategy?
Well, I think basically Taiwan is also learning now, and actually, as a researcher, we already, realize that drone might be very important forces in the future warfare. But I think the most important thing is that we are still discussing in which place will drone play the role in our, in a comprehensive picture of our future warfare. And I think we are still discussing and debating about this now. So I think it's all in progress. And but I think the most important thing is that many people will call that drone is a wonder weapon, game changer, and so on. But personally, I don't really think so. It's that, there are no single weapons could really change a war. So we need to know the limitation of drones, professional, suicide drones, or some modified commercial drones, just like what we see in Ukraine, in the battlefield in Ukraine. The modified commercial drones is actually very vulnerable against electronic warfare. But in wartime, we need both of them. So I think in Taiwan we are learning now and try to do things faster because we have to deter China as soon as possible, and all this effort is one of it. It's a part of it.
It's interesting they bring that, this melody, this symphony, so you will, about integrating different weapons. I want to stay with Jyh-Shyang because, in 2023, one of the former commanders of Indo-PACOM, John Aquilino, did mention the term hellscape when he mentioned about filling the Taiwan Strait with thousands of these unmanned systems. Here in Taiwan, Jyh-Shyang, what would that look like for Taiwan? Is that something that the military here is building up to, or do we still have a ways to go?
Well, I think since at least 1 decade, we are always discussing about so-called porcupine strategy. It's also trying to make Taiwan like a porcupine to use precision weaponry, precision munition like harpoons or anti-ship missile, anti-tank air defense system, and so on. Try to counter the Chinese platform. And I think the drones should be not only could be but should be a part of it. That means we should not only use a lot of anti-ship missiles to offset the large scale Chinese fleets, but we also need to use some smaller sea drones, maybe surface combatant, maybe underwater, and also UAVs and so on to counter the Chinese Navy and also landing forces.
Now, Paul. If I could jump in there, we've talked a lot about the quantity, filling the Taiwan Strait with these drones, hundreds of thousands of systems, hellscape, all these terms, but is there anything more to that? Is it just the machinery? What about the pilots involved, the infrastructure? Is the United States and Taiwan going to need to invest in that first before it even gets to that position of creating the Taiwan Strait into a hellscape?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the great fallacies with the so-called practice of drone warfare, and by the way, we could debate what in fact that may constitute or not for hours on end, but one of the great fallacies is that with the respatialization of war by virtue of these unmanned aerial systems, which means extending operational reach and removing the pilot from the cockpit, that you somehow remove the importance of enablers, of engineers, of sustainers, of maintainers, of intelligence analysts. I mean, when you take a look at an MQ-9 Reaper drone, the most advanced large armed and networked drone in the world, it takes something like 200 plus personnel to make that actually work. And it's a globally spanning enterprise. And so when we talk about those sort of tier one capabilities, and this is defined as a group one capability for the United States and different in NATO as well as our international organization sort of parlance, when you take a look at these capabilities, I think you actually have to invest more in the sort of back-end enablement that make them work. By the way, I think you can pull the string there as well for artificial intelligence in autonomous vehicles as well. There is a line of reasoning that you can somehow trade robots for personnel. But what we see from Ukraine and some very good investigative journalism and on the ground field research is you actually get a displacement of personnel. In other words, you may actually change towards smaller footprints in terms of pitched battles between the Ukrainians and the Russians, but that does not remove the importance of human capital for this enterprise of the profession of arms.
Now, Jyh-Shyang, I want to talk about the attitudes of using drones because I understand that Taiwan doesn't have the largest army in the world, and drones would be a great supplement to that fighting force. What is the attitude here in the military about introducing drones onto the battlefield in replacement of soldiers? Is that a welcomed strategy here in Taiwan?
I think it depends. Of course, I think in every military we can find a lot of conservative officers and generals, admirals, and so on, and so does Taiwan as well. But of course, we also do have a lot of flexible and young officers who knows the value of emerging technologies and so on. So this is also why I said before that we are debating about that, and now we are trying to we are trying to integrate the drone system into our current combat, our current systems or warfare concept. But I think the most important thing is not to integrate it into the current concept, but to develop a future concept. Because currently we are trying to do things like to play a Lego, so-called, try to put drone like a new stuff of a Lego on it. But what we need to do is like to draw a picture. And drone is in it already a part in it. So in that sense, I think we can do things better. But still, I think with the development of a Ukrainian battlefield, more people in Taiwan is now realizing the value of emerging technologies, and not only drones, but also like satellites and so on. And I think that is a most important thing what we are learning now.
And I think those lessons are actually a good segue into what is actually coming out of it, actual actions. And I want to talk more about the commercial industry in a little bit. But drones have played a significant part on both sides of the war in Ukraine. That's very clear. And what's also clear is that combat drones can also be made by private companies, with the United States, Turkey, and China leading the way. Companies in Taiwan have also poured significant investment into designing and building drone systems. And in fact, our producer, Tomasz Koper, got an exclusive look at one of the companies here in Taiwan leading that push.
These machines, on display inside an unassuming office in the city of Keelung, were designed for a deadly purpose. Drones are quickly becoming an integral part of the modern battlefield. In Ukraine, they have been proving their usefulness and potential as a force multiplier. One cheap, well-placed suicide drone can potentially take out a tank worth millions. Companies like DronesVision are betting on the growing need for these unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, as well as the technology to disrupt them. Due to the sensitive nature of their work, they did not want to reveal their identities.
那2014年左右，我们就发现有越来越多的无人机就是乱飞，那个时候也没有法规去规定说航道之内不能够飞行。那我们觉得说这个将来会是一个很大的问题，也潜在的一个很大的商机，所以我们认为这个是可行的。
This futuristic-looking device might remind you of a sci-fi gun, and honestly, you wouldn't be far off. It's a drone jammer that incorporates AI to help it identify its targets. Company representatives say that one lesson they've learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine is that suicide drones need to be cheap and easy to put together. Their solution is to create designs that can be 3D printed using consumer-grade equipment and completed using off-the-shelf components. This is a traditional drone frame of the kind often found in Ukraine. It takes hours to assemble from individual pieces and dozens of screws. This, on the other hand, takes only 15 minutes and was entirely 3D printed on a device much like this one. Whether it's small vehicles resembling commercial drones or bigger and more lethal systems, company representatives say Taiwan is uniquely positioned to develop these technologies.
台湾其实应该是最适合发展这些东西、这些产品的一个国家，因为我们有很好的这个 IC 设计制造业，所以这是绝佳的一个地方。
But Taiwan's future UAV fleet may one day go up against China, a global powerhouse of drone manufacturing. That means the need for these vehicles is likely to be staggering, like that of Ukraine, reported to have been losing up to 10,000 drones a month in the second year of fighting off the Russian invasion. DronesVision currently caters mainly to foreign clients, but the growing need for their products may eventually cast them as a critical component in Taiwan's defense industry. Xinglin and Tomasz Koper for Connected.
So as we saw in that story, Tomasz holding that massive gun, that is a very private company-led goal of producing these drones, anti-drone systems. Paul, I want to ask you, is there anything in the United States that's similar to this push for commercial companies to build these things for military use?
Absolutely, right. And so I think the example par excellence here would have to be the announcement several months ago by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks, for the so-called Replicator 1 initiative. And this is designed within 18 to 24 months to build a massive fleet of small, easily weaponized, attritable drones to the tune of millions, billions of dollars. And I think the principal purpose here has been stated clearly by defense officials is deterrence in the region and deterrence in South China Sea in particular, to gain quantity for so-called precise mass, but also to match the sort of interior lines that China would have in a conflagration within the South China Sea. Now, having said that, I think a lot of what's wrapped up in these defense initiatives in the United States, in Taiwan, and elsewhere is, in fact, deterrence. The need to impose unacceptable cost to prevent some sort of behavior. The outstanding question here for all of our countries, Western democracies, that face these similar near-peer threats is to what extent can you actually deter an adversary from using a drone based upon the asymmetrical advantage that drives a country to adopt these capabilities in the first place.
Interesting. And Jyh-Shyang, here in Taiwan, it seems like the military really relies on big R&D organizations like the Zhongshan Institute of Science and Technology rather than private companies. Do you think Taiwan is missing out on the array of commercial companies that have the potential to build these systems and maybe aren't doing so because they don't have that investment?
I think, of course, we already have a so-called drone national team, but the problem is that we still have some legal restriction for the production of some lethal weaponry like warheads or maybe some or bombs and so on. So we still need the National Zhongshan Institute to integrate, let's say, this kind of lethal weaponry on the drone system, or maybe Armaments Bureau of the MND, Ministry of National Defense, and. So I think this is, of course, indeed a problem. But I think the biggest problem for our drone industry is not only about that, but in several aspects. For instance, the first thing is that we still have a lot of legal restrictions, not only about the lethal weaponry or like warheads and so on, but also for testing drones. For instance, we are an island, so we need to counter the Chinese landing forces, not only on ground but also on the sea, on maritime domain. But if we want to test our drones in the maritime area, we need to change our current law because it's not allowed to do that.
And Paul, Paul, I want to get your reaction to that in a second, but I also want to ask you, in that gun that Tomasz was showing off, the scope of it, where you kind of see the target, also had some help with AI in recognizing targets and recognizing certain systems. How big of a role is AI going to play if it can be integrated into these systems?
Well, if you ask what I call sort of popular scholars within the Beltway, it's going to be game-changing. It's going to be revolutionary. It's going to be paradigmatic. And a lot of the assumptions surrounding AI-enabled warfare are totally speculative. They're completely unverifiable at this point, and they presuppose that our countries, in this case, the United States, which I know best, can't actually wage a large-scale ground combat operation in terms of a broader great power conflict. These are unverifiable assumptions, but they're very, very important in terms of myth-making to create a hype and a sense of urgency to quickly adopt these AI capabilities because, as Putin said, the Russian leader, that country which controls AI will control the world. And so what are the implications for AI going forward? I think we have to step back, and much like my research for drone warfare is to try to truly understand what it is we mean when we say AI-enabled warfare. So I'll give you just one framework that I've used to study military attitudes and public attitudes for AI-enabled warfare. Much like drones, you can use AI capabilities at scale, tactically on the battlefield, or strategically to help form a strategy, a course of action. And you can do so with more or less human oversight. And what I find is that when you bring these two considerations together, what you really find is some really interesting effects for especially soldiers' attitudes of trust for the AI capability. In short, and I know we're limited on time, but in short, and across military ranks in the United States, I find much less trust among military officers at the lieutenant all the way up to colonel level than we would like to believe. Now, if I could just briefly step back to comments from our professor in Taiwan and really comment on two particular aspects. One is this. For as much as we believe that the drone warfare literature is oversubscribed, in other words, everybody and anybody, to include my dad, who has no idea what a drone is, believe themselves to be a drone warfare expert, we don't actually know everything, right? And one of these topics that is still under debate and needs a lot more empirical study is the so-called international political economy of drones and all of the material that goes into producing those, the chips, so on and so forth. And so as you take a look at one key barometer for global public opinion, U.S. citizens, what I find is that the threat, as well as the country that receives the capability and how it's going to be used, is really important for the foreign military sales of these capability. And by analogy, I think we'd probably find similar findings within Taiwan, although in this case on the receiving end of exports of drones. The other thing, too, that the professor mentioned is the really wicked challenge that counter-drone operations in the homeland present. In fact, I would surmise a lot more challenging than the employment of drones overseas in a declared or undeclared theater of operations, mostly because of the policies and authorities that discipline our democracies and have to work through a bureaucracy for good reason to protect ourselves, protect each other, and protect our laws.
And Jyh-Shyang, I want to get your reaction to that too, about the attitudes and the openness to use AI for military operations. Is that welcomed here in Taiwan, given that Taiwan is sometimes called the technology island and its supremacy in creating these advanced semiconductors? Is it more? Would it be safe to say that it's more welcome to use AI here, given our trust in technology?
I think in Taiwan, just like in many countries, I think most of the people don't really have an idea about what is AI actually. So, and our drone industry is also in very initial phase, I will say. So currently, I think, of course, in the professional, for the professionals, we are already discussing about to using AI for drones, like to support the navigations and so on. But I think it will still be in very initial phase to be a supportive role for drones, and also to maybe to support for the data analysis for reconnaissance or something else like that. But again, in very initial phase, yeah.
And Paul, I want you to have the last word here. Looking forward in the future, is there any concerns that you have in how drones are going to be used, or are we still going to be riding this hype train with drones being used in Ukraine for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns as someone who studies this and has lived this as a veteran myself, deployed for years in Iraq and Afghanistan in providing intelligence for these operations. I guess two things relate to the sort of classical drone, which is semi-autonomous at best, and then AI going forward. On the former, I'm really concerned that when we talk about the use of drones, we don't focus as much on the ethical and moral implications of these capabilities, nor the perceived legitimacy of these operations. So how rightful they're conceived to be by way of our publics who exercise important democratic oversight and accountability for our senior leaders, or ought to, in republic democracies like the United States is. And what I find is that this is one of the chief implications for drones, one of the chief sort of considerations is civilian casualties. And that has a lot to do with perceived legitimacy. And there's also a lot more social issues wrapped up in the use of drones that we pay much less attention to include so-called racialization of drones and the implications of targets' intersectionality, so their gender, their sex, their race, for public support. As we shift to future warfare, I'm really concerned about the assumption of soldiers' trust in AI. And my research is some of the first, if not the first, experimental research into U.S. attitudes among the military for these capabilities, and it's quite problematic. And it's important that senior leaders reflect upon these findings in terms of military modernization going forward.
Well, thank you so much. As long as it's nothing like the Terminator movies, I think I'll be okay. But I'm afraid we've run out of time for this discussion. Thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Paul Lushenko, an assistant professor at the U.S. Army War College, joining us from Pennsylvania, and from Taipei, Dr. Jyh-Shyang, assistant research fellow at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research. And for our viewers everywhere, it's been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.